welcome everyone to the ANP podcast. And today's episode will talk about the range topic regarding to international maritime law and maritime boundary dispute. Today here with me, Professor Vasco Becker Wimberg. So, Professor, welcome. And can
Thank
you
you.
please introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you very much, first of all, for this kind invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Vasco Becker Weinberg. I'm a law professor at the Faculty of Law of the University of Lisbon. I'm also president of the Portuguese Institute for the Law of the Sea. And one of the fields that I research within international law is the law of the sea. And I'm extremely happy to be here and to be able to have this experience in your podcast. And have to congratulate you because recently launched podcast and it's doing very, very well. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Professor Vasco. And I believe this is our second time because we met yesterday and we have event yesterday, actually workshop regarding to international the role of public international law in settling maritime boundaries dispute. So if you could share a little bit experience, your perspective on yesterday event to the audience, that will be awesome.
Well, I think that yesterday's event, and I'll try to be impartial from my perspective, it was extremely interesting, particularly based on the questions that the students, the audience asked. The main focus was what does international law say about disputes, how they should be managed, how they should be solved, what are dispute mechanisms that are available to states when a dispute arises, and in the particular context of law of the sea, focusing on the rules and methodology applicable to maritime dispute boundary making, but also on with respect to joint development, which is a key element of Timor-Leste's history to independence and post-independence. So that was essentially the main focus. We also discussed a bit about illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing and the many challenges that brings from a security perspective and law enforcement perspective. So it was, I believe, extremely interesting. But again, I'm biased. I really enjoyed the experience of lecturing on these issues. But mostly I was very impressed by the questions and the engagement of students with the lecture.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yesterday was a very informative, very interesting session, and we received a lot of good feedbacks from the participant and from the GAP, AMP GAP teams, from the Timor Gap, and it was everyone said that it was a really good session.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And so for today, I'm going to ask you a few questions related to international law, maritime boundaries. Maybe we can touch base on a little bit about the illegal fishing and also about the maritime environment of pollution and everything. So my first questions, if you could share your views on the relevance of international maritime law and its potential importance for Timor-Leste and its people.
Well, international law generally is more important today than ever. We need to keep upholding international law and a rules-based order, and more so in the case of law of the sea and in the maritime domain. And Timor-Leste, as a small state sharing an island with a very large archipelagic state, has many challenges also from not only with respect to maritime disputes with Australia and Indonesia, successfully accomplishing dispute settlement with Australia and being involved now with Indonesia, trying to find a common path towards a shared outcome. There are also many challenges with respect to marine biodiversity and protection and fighting against pollution and climate change and other many threats that the marine environment faces. And this is more so considering the location of Timor-Leste in the coral triangle and the sensitivity of the marine biodiversity that exists here in Timor-Leste. And therefore, the level of responsibility together with the strong political commitment by the successful governments of Timor-Leste to defend, respect, and uphold international law with respect to international environmental law, particularly in the case of protection and preservation of the marine environment, is extremely important.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Vasco, for that very insightful answer. And my next question is, what does what role does public international law play in regulating and supporting the oil and gas sector, particularly in dispute maritime areas?
Well, I would say a very important role, it's an interesting question from a historical perspective. Natural resources have always been a very important catalyst for development of international law, from fisheries to oil and gas. These energy has always been, actually better said, marine natural resources have always been at the forefront of development. In the case of law of the sea, we see this in two examples under the Law of the Sea Convention. One is the exclusive economic zones, and as I always mention to my students, a key word in exclusive economic zone is economic. And the other one is the creation of the area, the seabed beyond natural jurisdiction, where states meeting during the 70s, negotiating very hard negotiations, dealing with the Law of the Sea Convention, actually addressed the key issue of these resources that exist beyond natural jurisdiction in the seabed. So it resulted in the creation of the area, this new maritime space, again, beyond natural jurisdiction, to be managed by the International Seabed Authority that sits in Kingston, Jamaica. And this novel aspect was a crucial element which highlights the importance of international law to regulate the use, operation, management of these resources, and developing standards for increasing protection of the marine environment. And this can be seen, for example, in the obligation on environmental impact assessment, which was recognized as part of customary international law, in a very important advisory opinion that was issued, I believe, in 2011 by the Seabed Dispute Chamber of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. And most importantly, how states have engaged with international law applicable to maritime to marine natural resources. So again, to answer a very long answer to a very important question, international law is crucial for the management of resources, particularly also in the case of oil and gas.
Wow, thank you so much. And now, yeah, and I'll remember you said about the key of economic.
And the key word, I believe that the key word in exclusive economic zone is the word economic.
Okay, I'll remember that. Now, and from the perspective of economic development, my next question is, what do you think about the effort are necessary to ensure that Timor-Leste can maximize the economic benefit arising from our maritime boundaries?
Well, a maritime boundary, it's important to understand that there are many maritime boundaries, but there are also many boundaries that have not yet been delimited between states. But the maritime boundaries offer legal security, legal certainty, and sometimes, in some cases, the absence of maritime boundary is an obstacle for cross-border cooperation, either because there is lack of political trust or lack of trust generally, or because there is so much of national engagement in disputes that the rhetoric becomes unbearable and therefore prevents states from cooperating. Other states do not have maritime boundaries, but that hasn't prevented them from cooperation and from not border, but cross national cooperation. That's very important. It's key. Nothing in the maritime space can be solved without cooperation. Cooperation is a key element of international law, and particularly so in the case of the law of the sea. So coming back to Timor-Leste, the maritime boundary, once settled, harmoniously between Australia and Timor-Leste has allowed both states to move what used to be a very controversial and very difficult relationship into a more constructive, positive development in that relationship. And I'm sure that in the case of Timor-Leste, the positive outcomes are there to be seen by everyone following the maritime boundary agreement between Timor-Leste and Australia in 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I agree with you. Say that it's really important to have a cooperation between the both states so that we can keep the relationship, keep the strong relationship between the both countries. And so, in light of in your opinion, what are the greatest threat? Now we're talking about the famous what's the famous topic right now about the illegal fishing. So my question is, in your opinion, what are the greatest threat that illegal, unprotected, unregulated fishing poses to developed coastal state like Timor-Leste?
Well, illegal fishing is a major threat for the whole world. Not only the states that are directly affected more or less, but we can find illegal fishing, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing all over the world, in every region of the world. It affects countries in different ways, obviously, because of the lack of resources to conduct law enforcement operations. But essentially, we have to remember that there's only one ocean. And this is a very large ecosystem that includes many other smaller, medium-sized ecosystems. And when we think about the marine environment, we have to think about one marine environment that we need to protect, including its resources. So the fact that in my country or in other countries or you are able to protect and fight against illegal fishing, the fact that this happens somewhere else in the world, you will be wrong to think it will not affect you. It will affect us. But we are seeing more and more threats to the marine environment by climate change, and these impacts, climate change, ocean acidification, deoxygenation, all of these things will affect, of course, obviously, marine natural resources like fish, and will affect us as well as humans, as a species. And therefore, cooperation is key. In the case of Timor-Leste, this affects more deeply because of the importance of coastal communities as part of the social structure of the country, a key social structure of the country, and therefore the fact that illegal fishing causes coastal communities that depend on fishing to lose livelihoods that then will affect the stability, economic stability, social stability of these communities is a major threat and has to be tackled, I believe, with a lot of resolve and a clear sense of purpose.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of the threats that you just mentioned and the bad effect that it causes to the country, to the marine. Do you think, is there anything that the government of, especially Timor-Leste government, can do to strengthen our marine security or to prevent this kind of thing can happen in the future, or it's happening right now, or is it something that we can do to prevent this?
Well, I think it's not a question about exactly specifically one government or another government. I think that it's an issue that is true for every government. The first thing is you need legislation in place that ensures that you recognize the threat that is IUF and how this has to be addressed, and create the legal basis for law enforcement operations to take place. The second thing is many states do not have the resources to conduct law enforcement operations, and therefore what you need to be doing is cooperating with states that have the ability to help you. So like many threats that are caused all around the world, threats that are major threats for coastal communities, as I mentioned earlier, illegal fishing is a threat that can only be solved and tackled through cooperation, without which you will not solve this major threat. And the other important thing is fish are an important element of ecosystems. So we should not look at IUF as a sole threat to fishing or regulation of fishing or management of fishing. It is a threat. Is it an environmental threat? It's an existential threat. And I think it's very important that we do develop at national level, regional level, and multilateral level the tools and the commitment by states to tackle this terrible threat that we all face, which is extremely lucrative. So it is a case where crime does pay off, because in the times where there's growing demography, in the times where fish is a major source of protein, and there more and more we are seeing stocks being depleted to the point of extinction or almost impossible recovery, of course there's a very important economic incentive to engage with illegal fishing. And this has to be stopped, and it can only be stopped through international cooperation.
Wow, that's a very good answer to to the questions. Okay, now move on to the next question. So yesterday during the workshop, you mentioned about the marine pollution, the environment. My question is, how does the public international law address transboundary marine pollution and share environmental responsibilities?
The one of the major issues that is addressed by international law is precisely transboundary pollution. When we talk about environmental impact assessment, we of course at the very early stage of development, we always focus on the issue of transboundary pollution and how states have an obligation to protect against transboundary pollution and making sure that pollution caused in one state does not affect neighboring states. And more importantly, that before engaging in activity that might cause transboundary threat and cross-border contamination or pollution, states have to conduct an environmental impact assessment. Fast forward a few decades, we're seeing that the threshold for environmental impact assessment is increasing, and it's becoming higher and higher, and rightfully so. And nowadays, when we talk about environmental impact assessment, we're not only focusing on the environmental perspective per se, we will focus also on social aspects of assessment. And so therefore, international law, when addressing the protection and preservation of the marine environment, does look at the environment as one. And I always tell my students that one of the most important provisions of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea is Article 192, which simply states in a very strong one-sentence article that states have the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment. It does not say if it's state parties, non-state parties, what kind of states, landlocked states, flag states. It says states. So we have to interpret this as a very important rule of international customary law, focusing on all states to protect and preserve the marine environment, not marine environment generally speaking. And it does not limit this obligation to areas within national jurisdiction. It includes areas within, beyond, but also disputed maritime areas. And therefore, I think that this obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment is a very important obligation, recognized as being part of customary international law, and therefore it is an element that has to be considered in state-to-state relation, be that at bilateral, regional, or multilateral levels.
Yeah, that's very true. And with that, Professor Vasco, my next question is, what role can a small state such as Timor-Leste play in promoting compliance with international maritime law?
Well, small island states have had in the last few years a key role in the progressive development of international law. We see that, for example, with the two advisory opinions by the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and then the subsequent advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice. And there were these were two decisive opinions that only saw the light of day because the small island developing states, particularly in the Pacific, have been pushing for or have put this issue on the agenda and have really pushed it forward for all states. And it has been very successful, or it is a very successful example to refer to. Recently, seeing the outcome of these advisory opinions on a resolution approved by the General Assembly just last week in New York, and therefore it just shows it doesn't matter really the size of the country or how strong or how developed a state is. The important thing is that states, no matter what their size and relevance, they can actually push the envelope forward, being leaders in the progressive development of international law, particularly because certain threats such as climate change or pollution or illegal fishing are strongly felt in these countries perhaps than they are in other countries. For example, when we're dealing with sea level rise, there's no better example of how this is an existential threat than small island developing states in the Pacific or in the Indian Ocean, because sea level rise will affect every state, but differently. And the fact that the certain states, perhaps in more developing or developed areas of the world, believe that they will have the means or resources to mitigate these impacts by building barriers or other measures of protection, that they will deal with this differently. It's a very wrong view of things. We will all be affected, and international awareness is relevant, but also action. International action is extremely relevant. And through environmental litigation, through seeking advisory opinions, through engagement at multilateral level, as we've seen with the General Assembly of the United Nations, through academia, through other stakeholder and other forum, for example, the International Law Commission under the UN, but also, and it was the first body to really think about this, International Law Association Committee on Sea Level Rise, and on basins as well before that. So there has been, there is a legacy of engagement with this topic and others, and therefore what we've seen today is the result of small island developing states and states such as Timor-Leste putting the issue on the agenda, raising awareness when other states probably thought it would not be worthy of such awareness. We see things moving forward. So I think it's, again, it's just a good example how even a small state can make a huge difference.
Wow, I'm really happy to hear that now we are spreading awareness about this threat too. So we hope that with this other country, other state can take it as an example for them to also implement in their country or this state. So my last question, it will be, what advice will you give to young legal professionals or Timorese students who wish to pursue a career or academic studies in public international law or international maritime boundaries?
Well, I don't feel I should give advice to anyone, but I would say that every young person today faces tremendous challenges. The hopes of humanity, of course, depend always on the younger generation. And I have to say that this young generation that we have today, people coming into law, to university or leaving university, are now facing tremendous challenges that humanity never faced before at this level. These are environmental threats that we mentioned, but also new ways the world will work and operate through more presence in the outer space, use of artificial intelligence. The world is changing at a very rapid pace. And while we are also growing in terms of population in the world. So there are many, many challenges, and therefore we need people that are able to understand these challenges, all the difficulties that they entail, but also to be able to think of solutions and be able to challenge what we believe is the status quo, and that certain solutions are traditional and should be followed, probably we do need a different approach. We need a generation that is ready to challenge what we believe is the established solution and think outside of the box. And so I personally have great hopes in your generation, in the younger generation, particularly hopes on being able to develop know-how, to be technically very capable and competent, but also on your resolve to solve the issues that not only your generation, that we are all facing as human beings.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think in my generation right now, I think there are a lot of very competitive, competence, smart young people out there, and we have a lot of resources here that can also help us to develop your knowledge and also contribute to this country's development in the future. And I really have like a big hope for my generations, and I believe that we can contribute maximum to this country's development. And also thank you so much for the very motivative advice for the and I personally I'm going to take your advice for sure, and I hope everyone, the audience, can also take your advice, and especially for the younger generation, my generation. And thank you so much for today's for joining us for this podcast. I think this is the end. We're coming to the end of today's session.
You've been
podcast.
Very, very kind. Thank you.
And we wish you all the best with you still have a week here, so we hope you enjoy the country. And I know this is not your first time in here. This is like your fifth time in Timor-Leste.
Fourth, yeah.
Fourth, okay. So maybe I say fifth because maybe we can see you again in the future.
Hopefully so, yes.
So we wish you all the best with your work here, and thank you so much. We learn a lot, obviously, from you. We learn a lot about the illegal fishing. We need to have the regulation in place in order to prevent the threats, the challenge that we have about the environmental. We need to have more security in the marine, and the importance of the international law in the oil and gas sector and everything. So it's really great to have you here again, and it's such a great conversation with you. And I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you again next time.
Hopefully so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.